There are two chords that made us all want to violently smash our controllers and put them directly through the screen of our TVs when we were kids. And yet somehow, it kept us coming back for more every single time. And the irony of it is that the chords themselves shouldn't really elicit that emotional response. If anything, there's a second set of chords that should, but we'll get to those a little later. Because the year is 1985 and you just heard this. Yeah, no matter how many times I tried, I either ran into the stupid mushroom or fall into a pit. And 7-year-old me didn't exactly have a good grasp on my emotions. But this little bit of 8-bit music from Super Mario Bros. Is the perfect example of an authentic or perfect cadence. Not only that, but this version uses fantastic melodic writing, both in the top melody and the inner voice movements. Let's check it out. Now really, this is pretty simple. All it is a line that goes... That's it. That's the whole thing. So how does this outline our cadence, and what exactly is it doing? Why is it written like this in this particular scenario? An authentic or perfect cadence is quite simply just a 5-chord to a 1-chord. Now let's remind ourselves really quick what that means. The Super Mario Bros. Music is in the key of C. Now if we take a C major scale, we can assign numbers to each of those notes. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and that brings us back to 1, right? So if we assign chords to each of those numbers, we get this. Those are the naturally occurring chords within the major scales. We consider those to be like our diatonic triads. They just use the notes that are already in the scale, which means that some chords are major and some chords are minor. Major, minor, minor, major, major, minor. This one's the only exception, it's diminished, and then major again. An authentic or perfect cadence simply uses the 5-chord, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and just resolves to the 1-chord. It's one of the most consonant ending final sounds in music. And that's made even more powerful when we add a very important note to it, which happens to be the focal point of this melody. Check it out. The first two notes of the melody outline the most important notes in the chord that tell us what this harmony is. And that's because the first two notes happen to be the most important notes of any chord. Check it out. A chord is obviously a combination of notes, but the question is, which of those notes actually determines the quality of the chord? What tells us if it's minor or major? And furthermore, what tells us maybe some other important information about that chord? Well, the first note you might go to is the root of the chord, and this would make a lot of sense, and it is a very important note. But on its own, the root doesn't actually tell us anything about the chord. Just what the root of that chord is. Now you might be thinking, okay, well the 5th might tell us something, but actually the 5th kind of tells us nothing. It doesn't determine minor or major, and it doesn't determine really any other qualities about the chord. When we look at the 3rd of a chord, that's where the most important information lies. Because one simple change to the 3rd of the chord can change the entire thing from major to minor. If a normal major triad consists of 1, 3, and 5, and a minor triad consists of 1, flat 3, and 5. There's only one change. One note out of all 3 was altered by a half step, and it completely changes the entire chord. Now what happens when we start dealing with 4-note chords? If we add a 7th into that chord, well now that introduces a whole other opportunity for us to change the entire sound of the chord. Because while yes, the 3rd tells us whether it's minor or major, minor chords and major chords can sound very different depending on what we do with the 7th. Is the 7th natural or major? Is the 7th flat? Combining different versions of that 3 and that 7 can give us a whole bunch of different chords. And in the case of our melody here, we're using a major 3rd and a flat 7th. Combining those two creates one of the more dissonant intervals we have in music of the tritone. And it also happens to be one of the biggest reasons why a 5-1 cadence works so well. So our first two notes are the 3rd and the flat 7th, but then our root note, our bass note down here, is the root of the chord. So between these 3, we have our dominant 5 chord. Now this is so powerful because of the fact that everything wants to draw itself together. we have two what we call leading tones, and leading tones are a half-step resolution note. So we have an F that can resolve to an E, and we have a B that can resolve up to a C. Those are very powerful movements because they're so close to where they ultimately want to end up. So we have this authentic or this perfect cadence. It's very major, it's bright sounding. It's a 5 chord and a major 1 chord, which almost in this context makes us feel like it's just rubbing it in. It's just kicking you while you're down. Turning 7-year-olds into little rage monsters. Or 40-year-olds. I don't know how old you were when this came out. But here's the interesting thing. What happens when you run out of lives? Well, we get a different sound. That was the ultimate, like, scream fest. No! Maybe it was just me. Maybe I had rage issues when I was a child. Now, this is fascinating because it's actually kind of like the opposite. Instead of a perfect cadence, we actually have something more closely related to a plagal cadence. To understand a plagal cadence, we have to go back to our number system. Thus far, we've talked about resolving a chord progression by going from the 5 to the 1. That's our authentic or our perfect cadence. Well, a plagal cadence is another way of resolving a chord progression. It allows us to arrive back at the home base of the 1 chord, but it does it in a slightly different way. Instead of coming from the 5 chord to the 1 chord, we're actually going to use the 4 chord. Now, if you remember our diatonic triads that we mentioned earlier, the 4 chord is major. In this case, in the key of C, it's F major. Now, because we don't have that tritone of the major 3rd and the flat 7th of our G chord, our 5 chord, the pull to resolve that to C major isn't quite as powerful. It results in this cadence sounding a little bit darker, and this is what we call our plagal cadence. Now, what happens if we take that 4 chord, in this case F major, and make it F minor? Well, then we get another beautiful sound, and we simply call that a minor plagal cadence. And that's almost what we have here. So knowing that this is kind of more closely related to a plagal cadence, we kind of start to get the idea why that was used when you run out of lives. When it's truly game over, well, that kind of warrants a little bit of a darker, sadder sound? More rage-inducing? Because now you gotta fully start over. But there's something interesting going on in this particular cadence, and it makes it not a true plagal cadence, and also not really a minor plagal cadence, but closely related. Check it out. The first thing that we have, of course, is our callback to our main theme. That's literally just the theme. But instead of going how we normally expect the main theme to go, instead we get this. That is super slick, and there's actually some interesting things going on there. Now, the first chord that we get is that 4 chord, F major, right? And we could simply expect it to go 4 to 1, which would be that plagal cadence. Instead, we throw something else in there. That's our final melody line. Now, on the surface, it almost sounds like it's just going F major, then F minor, which would be a minor plagal cadence, except that's not quite what we're doing. And if you listen closely to that root note, to the bass note going on underneath, it gives away what's happening with the harmony, and it's really kind of cool. Check it out. Did you hear it? We get the minor 2, the D flat right here, which makes this chord not F minor, but it makes it D flat major. Now, you can see how those two are very closely related. In fact, if we look at the actual scales that they would use, we find something kind of interesting. Let's look at F minor. Now let's look at D flat major. When we overlap those two sets of notes, F minor and D flat major, we see that there's only one difference, and that is this G flat. Obviously in F minor, we don't use a G flat, we use a G natural, but what scale in D flat could use a G natural? Let's look at that. This scale is just D flat Lydian. Lydian, of course, has our 1, 2, 3, 4 that's raised has a sharp 4. 1, 2, 3, sharp 4, 5, 6, 7, 1. And that happens to be the exact same notes as F natural minor. 1, 2, flat 3, 4, 5, flat 6, flat 7, 1. Those two scales are exactly the same. They just happen to start on different root notes. That's it. So although technically this is not a minor plagal cadence, it's very closely related to a minor plagal cadence, and therefore it has that sort of really dark tone. I mean, our plagal cadence, if we were going to use our major 4 chord, already has a darker effect than going, right? That's very bright. It's very happy almost. And when we go, that's a little darker. It's still perfectly fine and happy. It's not sad necessarily, but it is definitely darker than, right? But once we go one step further and take that 4 chord and flip it minor, and you guys know, if you watch this channel with any regularity, minor 4 is one of my favorite chords on the planet because it has such a beautiful, dark quality to it, right? It's gorgeous. So what we're playing here isn't necessarily that, but it's very closely related to that. If anything, you might even consider, is that darker? I don't know. That's an interesting question. Do you think that D flat major here is actually darker than F minor? That's an interesting question because they're very similar and they resolve to that C major. So we have two cadences. I mean, dying in Mario is literally a great lesson in resolving harmony. It's a great lesson in the different types of cadences that exist. We have our authentic or our perfect cadence. And then we have our darker plagal, almost kind of minor plagal cadence. And resolve in a way that's probably going to cause a fair number of broken TV screens. Hey, and I want to let you know that tomorrow is the final day to get the launch sale pricing on my brand new book. You can learn how to play lines on lots of different cadences, and it doesn't involve putting a controller through your TV, but it is the way that I support this channel, and you may notice I don't usually take sponsorships from other companies on this channel, and that's because I made the decision to try to support this channel by creating things that are directly from me that are super useful and hopefully relevant to you. I've taken sponsors in the past, but sometimes the issue is that it could just be a random company that's really not relevant to me or you. And so I set out to make some stuff that could help you out a ton. And I'm super excited to finally release my very first ebook. It's called Jazz Piano Improv Volume 1, super original. But you know what? That's exactly what it is. I wrote 50 choruses of improvisational lines on a variety of chord progressions that are used in lots of popular jazz standards. There's 40 downloadable backing tracks that come with it. You get the PDF and you also get all of the backing tracks. And there's even different versions of the backing tracks. Like, we went overboard, trust me, check it out. So there's obviously a reference track with the full solo so that you can hear what it's supposed to sound like. You can study the music along with the recording of it, but then pianists probably don't want to have piano in their ears when they're trying to play the piano, so there's a version just with bass and drums. But I thought, you know, maybe some people might want to just play the right hand, and I'll go ahead and play some chords for you in the left hand. So there's a version with a little bit of piano comping in there. But even then, I was like, well, maybe pianists might feel like that kind of gets in the way still. You know, it might be complicated to hear another piano while you're trying to play the piano, so how about I do some comping with a different instrument? And I recorded a version that has a little bit of electric piano, like a Rhodes sound behind it as well. So there's all kinds of different options to choose from. It's a great way to develop your improvisational skills, and in addition to the music and the backing tracks, it's also actually a book. I went through the start of each chapter and I wrote out what you're actually going to encounter. I pointed out some of the particularly interesting melodic lines and why they're constructed that way, what makes them work, what makes them particularly notable, so that you can have a better understanding of the things that you're going to be playing and what you might like to take and insert into your own vocabulary. It's jam-packed full of value and information and all kinds of cool stuff, and I wanted to make it as accessible as possible. And in the process of launching this, I wanted to get some feedback on it and get you guys using it, and so it's at 50% off the price that it's most likely going to be. But again, that's only for another day. So if you do want to pick up that launch sale pricing on my brand new ebook, Jazz Piano Improv Volume 1, use the link in the description down below to check that out. And again, that is the way that I've chosen to support this channel. So if you enjoy my my content, if you like the videos that I make, that is the absolute most helpful thing that you can do, and I'm super appreciative of everybody who's bought the book so far. Your feedback has been incredible. You guys are loving it, and that's just so awesome to hear. So I'm so grateful for that. Thank you so much for your support, and thank you so much for watching this video. Whether you choose to buy the book or not, doesn't matter. I'm happy you're here, and I will see you in the next one.